You are the most prominent food industry whistleblower. That's what you've become. And I'm so appreciative of your work because you tell it like it is. And now you've got this new book, which is incredible. I've been honored to have the opportunity to endorse it on the back, which I'm super proud of. So thank you for letting me do that. And yeah, I'm just so excited for you. But let's start high level. What are the concepts, the core concepts presented in Good Energy? There's so much buzz now about this book. What would you say the core concepts are that people listening to this, watching this, can harness to improve their lives?
You got to see chronic disease as interconnected. And there is trillions of dollars of incentives to blind us from that fact. The book opens with my co-author, Calley Means. The book's in her voice. And the first chapter is about her choosing one of 42 specialties after medical school, right? Every doctor decides one of 42 things to devote their entire lives to. We've chopped up disease in the body into all these things. You go to hospital, we don't even think about it, right? Nobody really questions this. You see the cardiology department and, the department that does hormone disorders like diabetes, and the psychiatry department, and the skin department, the dermatology. There's just all these different siloings. And Casey decided to be a head and neck surgeon. And her dream was to further specialize. So there's 92 subspecialties. And when she was trained at Stanford Med School, is the real way you advance medicine is further and further silo the body. So the dean of Stanford Med School, Lloyd Minor, he was a head and neck surgeon, but he did an extra fellowship, and he devoted his entire career to basically 1 square inch of the face.
Wow.
And he had a condition named after him, Minor's disease or Minor's syndrome. And that was the archetype, to just silo. And the first chapter, which really sets what we believe is the biggest issue in the country, was Casey's awakening when she was doing her third sinusitis surgery of the day. Somebody is so inflamed in the sinuses that she had to knock them out and cut open the remnants of that. And she realized that patient was under her knife 6 months before. And she realized, top of her class, Stanford, president of her Stanford undergrad class, all the credentials, right? Top of her Stanford med school class, all the awards in head and neck surgery residency. Not many people more trained, NIH research. She didn't know why that person had inflammation. In all of that training, it never occurred to her why that person was inflamed. Then she looked at that patient's charts, and she looked at all of her patients' charts and realized almost to the person it was diabetes they had. Often depression, almost always on a statin for high cholesterol. On average, her patients that she was putting under the knife had 8 other comorbidities. And she actually started asking questions. Is the diabetes related to the inflammation? These thoughts didn't occur to her.
Wow.
And she was reprimanded. The attending surgeon said, you're not going to nutrition school. You're trying to connect the interconnectedness. You're trying to think about dietary advice. She was reprimanded for that. To me, this unpacks the system we live in, which is profiting by naming and siloing metabolic conditions that are making up 9 out of 10 killers of Americans, as you talk about so often, and 95% of medical costs. The greatest invention of profit maximization in the history of capitalism is chronic disease. Think about it, right? When you get obesity or prediabetes or heart issues as a child, you don't die, you just suffer. And when you're told that the solution is the statin, the metformin, the antidepressant, all of which, those rates of those drugs have doubled in the past 5 years among teens. When you get kids on that idea, thinking that pill or even that procedure is gonna basically be the savior, they don't change their habits. And they just keep racking up the comorbidity, which is exactly what's happening. 65% of the American people have at least one chronic condition right now. RFK's talked about this, but when JFK was president, I think it was 4 to 5%.
Wow.
So it's just an astronomical treadmill that's been profitable. It's created right now the largest and fastest growing industry in the country, healthcare. I know we talk about the size of healthcare a lot, but fastest growing too. And unlike any business we start where innovation is lower cost, better outcomes, the more we spend, the more chronic disease goes up and the lower life expectancy declines.
Wow.
So that all goes, and this is where we really are tag teaming and where my experience as a lobbyist for these industries, the food and pharma industries, come in. This is not a conspiracy. The fundamental economic fact is that the entities that Casey existed under as a doctor were incentivized for more people to be sicker for longer periods of time. It's a simple concept we talk about a lot, but we really break down why that is. She did the math. 50% of Stanford Med School's funding somehow touched pharma.
Wow.
Pharma is the largest funder of medical schools, the largest funder of research, the largest funder of the regulatory agencies. The FDA itself is paid 75% of their budget comes from pharma, not from taxpayers. They're the largest funder of politicians. The pharmaceutical industry funds politicians 5 times more than the oil industry. They're the largest funder of media, 60% of TV news spending. They're the largest funder of civil rights groups. I mean, you go down the list and they're just buying off the institutions that we trust, and they've created this system that's so normalized we barely question it. That's based on a lie. And that disease is siloed. So the book really is arguing for a complete and utter paradigm shift of how we view, and I want to be really specific again, chronic disease. If you have a burst appendix or a complicated childbirth or an infection, something that's going to kill you right away, an acute issue, the medical system's amazing. I think for the most part we'd agree with that. For chronic disease, it is a complete and utter failure that we've trusted the system, and we have to change the standard of care for almost every chronic disease. Before that doctor is writing on the prescription pad for you or your child the statin, the Ozempic, the metformin, the SSRIs, what have you, the Adderall, we have another route available to us. And that is not only feeling better today, but actually using that symptom as a path of curiosity to actually, address the root cause. What these warriors, these other books here, and you always talk about, address the root cause of the interconnected issues that are happening in our body. So the book is a examination of the problem and really trying to synthesizing a lot of ideas from you and other warriors in the metabolic health space on just a tactical roadmap, because there needs to be top-down policy change, which we can talk about, but this revolution is happening from the bottoms up. So it's a guidebook to get outside of the broken medical system for metabolic conditions.
One fascinating insight that you posted on X recently that was mind-blowing to me, and it makes perfect sense, but it's just not something that people that are not working in the system as you are could conceive of. It's that pharmaceutical companies aren't necessarily funding the news to influence consumers. They're doing it to influence the news,
right?
Which to me that's scary, because we look to the news, right, the quote unquote news, as being for providing an objective voice, right, in society. But if they're not able to report on the potential risks, the downsides of these drugs, right, that's a big problem.
Yeah, and I think this is really important to unpack. I think people have as we hear this thesis, I think one reason it hasn't been just fully mainstream how broken the incentives of healthcare are is because we all know people that work in the industry and we're like, they're not bad people. The brilliance of this industry is it's taken good people and produces really bad results. And this is something I saw that you mentioned on the media, something I saw firsthand. And we helped steer, 12 years ago when I was working for the pharmaceutical industry, money to TV news. And we had back channel relationships with the producers at those channels. Wow. You saw it with the Twitter files. There was the news about people having the back channel into Twitter to censor things. Just a total line from the pharmaceutical industry, who was one of the top spenders on Twitter ads. Additionally, food companies. There's actually emails and the Twitter files on the food companies too. McDonald's and other companies, they fund ads on news, on social media companies. They get a direct line to the company. And they stand behind research that is, they also fund. And they waive research. I had a tweet taken down about McDonald's.
Wow.
Saying that chicken nuggets, questioning chicken McNuggets, the ingredients.
It was just deleted?
It was before Elon took over, it was deleted. Wow. It was taken off. There was all this talk on any criticism of processed food before Elon took over. It was like it was a joke. You posted anything. This is what they do. Not only are we funding the media itself and the ways we get information, pharma's funding, of course, the research, and so is the food industry. The food industry funds 11 times more research than the NIH. So for every single ingredient, there's a study saying that ingredient is fine. You're seeing this a lot with food colorings right now. We're actually doing an activist campaign against Kellogg's. Fruit Loops here in the United States are reformulated with toxic colorings tied to ADHD that they don't include in any other cereal around the world. And they are pummeling us with studies that they've funded that the NIH has often endorsed as well, saying that those colorings are fine. That's how the game works. But because they pay the bills for the media, it allows that back channel. And of course, as Tucker talked about when he was at Fox, he felt self-censored. Of course you self-censor when your bills are paid by an industry. So what does this do? Why does this matter? I always go to COVID. I call COVID, I'm not being too facetious here, essentially a foodborne illness. If you were metabolically healthy, you had a very low chance of dying of COVID. I mean, the stats coming out are wild on the amount of people that died of COVID that had 3 or more comorbidities. I think it's like upwards of 90%. It was like people dying of COVID, their immune systems were very compromised.
That was known really early on.
Yeah, and it was known early in 2020. There could have been a true rallying cry from the media and questioning of why people in the United States, we were dying multiples higher death rate than other countries. This is a warning flag that our immune systems are compromised and weak in the United States based on a confluence of metabolic factors. It was all about a pharmaceutical solution, for better or worse, right? And maybe we won't even talk about that, but certainly not the whole story.
Yeah.
I always find it interesting, the book, is hit #1, which is just amazing. You listen to the top podcasts from you, to our other friends in the health space, up to Joe Rogan, which I basically consider a metabolic health podcast. Almost every day they're talking about how to better themselves, him and his guests, how to look at the sunlight, how to exercise, what diet they're, where people gravitate to on anything that's not corrupted by pharma money is basically how to thrive, how to feel better, how to essentially improve our metabolic health. Americans left to their own devices, I think, want that information. But the fact that some of our main information sources don't provide that, they don't provide that robust discussion. The fact you walk into a classroom, I have a young child, and clearly see, I would call devastation among children right now. It is not normal. 25% of teens have fatty liver disease, and 50% of teens are overweight or obese, and 33% of young adults are pre-diabetic. We keep talking about these stats. These are I don't know a word strong enough. Genocidal. These are bad. These are really bad. That's the biggest issue. Like parents really care about this. At the high end, our parents and ourselves, we're getting more disease. So that's where people gravitate to, and the fact that the news is able to be bought off is a big problem. And it can be changed tomorrow. This is a core point of the book too, is actually the solutions aren't that complicated from the bottom up or the top down. We've got a lot of incentives saying that they're complicated. We can turn this around quickly. The childhood obesity rate in Japan is like 3%.
Wow.
Here it's well over 20%. Like these things can change. This is not normal what's happening in America, and we actually know the answers.
And you've argued that we don't need more nutrition studies to get to the core of the problem here, the crux of the problem.
I think, you might disagree, and I actually get a lot of value off your analysis of nutrition studies and good actors in the space. But I would argue that if you actually take all nutrition studies conducted since World War II, I would actually say all studies and all research funding, the trillions of dollars of research that's gone to chronic disease treatments, if you delete every one of those studies and fire every single department at every single university that's either studying pharmaceutical solutions to chronic disease or nutrition, we would actually be a healthier country. As Peter Tia pointed out in the first chapter of his book, life expectancy has increased if you control for contagious and infectious diseases. The chronic disease industrial complex since World War II has been an absolute and utter failure. So on that front, truly, I don't think this idea that heart disease is a statin deficiency, diabetes is a metformin deficiency, on down the list, I don't think it's been marginally helpful. I actually think it's been destructive. You can go through the rigged research on each of those drugs impacting a certain biomarker, but this overall paradigm we have right now, truly, somebody's on a statin. I have family members that say, "Oh, now I can eat eat whatever I want." That's essentially what the message is. Certainly the message with Ozempic, with literally doctors from Harvard saying obesity isn't tied to what you eat.
You mean Ozempic? Obesity is not an Ozempic deficiency?
Well, that's literally, it sounds hyperbolic. That is essentially what doctors at Harvard are saying. We've talked about, I think last time, Fatima Cody Stanford, the lead obesity researcher at Harvard, saying it's a genetic condition and that it's not tied to food or lifestyle. That's the message.
It's crazy.
The Council for the American Academy of Pediatrics which is now suggesting Ozempic as a first-line defense for 12-year-olds. It's not even try diet and exercise first. It's first-line defense. This is a issue that's just like heart disease, just like type 1 diabetes. This is something that you're born with. This is something that needs emergency, like quick interventions. So I want every parent to know this, and this is a great example of the incentives we talk about in the book. The medical system uses those white coats. They use that credential of medical school. My sister realized she was really just a cog in this overall machine where she's indoctrinated into this way of being, where if you're a pediatrician, you are reprimanded and potentially lose your license if you go against the American Academy of Pediatrics, which is 90% funded by Pharma. If you're go down the list, Alzheimer's, psychiatry, what have you. These institutions that create the standard of care are all funded by pharmaceutical makers, and the power of that doctor recommending that treatment from these organizations is very powerful. And very soon, a parent who questions their doctor on a lifetime Ozempic prescription for their 12-year-old who's a little bit overweight, they're going to be told that they're going against the standard of care. They're going to be told that they're being anti-science. There's a lot, I hear this all the time now from parents. There's intense pressure if this child's a little bit sad in high school, SSRI, and they're threatened with a lot of, that the kid's going to commit suicide or other things. There's this pressure, when that doctor's telling you that, and it's not really a discussion. So I think that whole credentialism that my sister saw and this whole indoctrination that happens in med school really filters through to where, we're in a situation right now where unless we do something drastic, Ozempic will be pushed on 50% of 12-year-olds because 50% of 12-year-olds are overweight or obese.
Yeah. I mean, are you ultimately glad that we have access to these drugs for those that truly need it? Or do you think that they're a net negative?
This is the argument of the book. I'll just be specific with Ozempic. I think we always get into the edge case, the 400-pound extremely diabetic person. I'm not really concerned with them. I'm concerned with the median American. The average American is on multiple chronic disease treatments. They're on a treadmill of interventions. My mom, who's also, my mom's sudden death has been my inspiration here. I know I shared that with you. When she got her pancreatic cancer diagnosis at 72, she was on 5 different medications. She was on the standard thing, right? The statins, the metformin, on down the list. And each step along that journey over 30 years of racking up those pills, she was told this is normal. Oh, prediabetes, 50% of people your age have that. They're on metformin. Statins is the most prescribed drug in the country. ACE inhibitor, high blood pressure, that's normal. Oh, you're having trouble losing weight after having a baby, that's normal. All these signs, literally by definition, signs of metabolic dysfunction, it was take a pill. And the reason we wrote this book and the reason the book's dedicated to my mom is because truly, if one of those times, if the doctor sat her down and explained how these indicators represent cellular dysfunction in her body, explained that she might not be able to meet her future grandchild, see other milestones for her kids and her family, if she was explained that, I know she wanted to be healthy. It's a key point of the book that it's a lie that Americans are lazy and don't want to be healthy. Casey was told that her first week of medical school. She literally had a class where they said the American patients want to eat crappy food and they want to be sedentary. There's trillions of dollars of incentives that are pushing that on people. People follow incentives. I think there's this, you have other folks come on and they do studies that are rigged in many cases that say lifestyle interventions fail. Well, they fail because there's $4.5 trillion of incentives to get us addicted and sick from just the healthcare system and then the food system. If we steered the standard of care to what actually works and actually like they do in Europe, if you're pre-diabetic in Denmark, actually the home country of the Ozempic maker, they subsidize a keto diet.
Wow.
Science-backed keto diet. They actually pay you to exercise. These are rational uses of healthcare dollars and incentives. So back to your question, this is not an anti-drug crusade we're on. This book is a crusade, and really what I feel like Casey and I are devoting our lives to, foot soldiers with you and many others, is to follow the science. is where the rubber hits the road, is that meeting with the doctor when you are slightly on that edge of the high cholesterol and about to get that statin. When you're with that doctor, when your kid's overweight and it's the Ozempic, these hundreds of millions of appointments that happen a year, that to me is where the rubber hits the road on chronic disease. And if those doctors were actually following the science, instead of that antidepressant, they'd be subsidizing and recommending exercise and sunlight and non-processed food. PCOS, infertility, which is a scourge right now. We're becoming infertile and very quickly. It's happening for men and women, but I'm sure we both know many women dealing with PCOS. It's skyrocketing. Those women are rarely told that PCOS is insulin resistance. It's not related to insulin resistance. It's like it is insulin resistance. They are very quickly pushed into interventions and potentially very invasive interventions. Now, I think a woman should be able to do whatever the hell she wants, but I think we should have informed consent.
Absolutely.
And I think the problem is we do not have informed consent. Informed consent on any of these conditions, this chronic disease treadmill, just go down the list, is explaining the research you talk about every day and the research we talk about in the book on core metabolic habits. So at the very least, if doctors even just said it, we'd have a transformation because people listen to doctors.
Yeah.
And then from the higher end, just the subsidies of healthcare. We spend double the amount of European countries on healthcare. They live 5 to 6 years longer. That's a lot. They actually spend, in France, double the amount on food. So they spend half the amount so they actually, I see it as use their healthcare budget, shift it to food. They have a much healthier, more thriving population in many respects.
Yeah.
So, this food is medicine, exercise is medicine, these things all sounded fluffy to me when I was a pharmaceutical lobbyist, but you have to literally look at the problem, which is that 9 out of 10 deaths are caused by metabolic dysfunction. It's a scourge of the country. And ask, what is the best science-backed medical intervention for that? Doctors should then recommend those medical interventions, and they should be incentivized with healthcare dollars. It's kind of simple, but that's what the country has to get to, because this is existential. I mean, I think we're becoming a somewhat non-competitive population with what's happening to kids.
Wow.
And we will go bankrupt. I mean, we're not going to drug our way into lower costs.
No.
We're not going to drug our way into health. And those stats, your eyes gloss over them, but growing double the rate of GDP and already 20% of GDP, that's 40% in like 15 years. I mean, it's literally like we have to get to metabolic habits. We are being decimated by metabolic conditions, and we have to do that. I am really pushing hard on the top-down change because I do worry about the country. I mean, I think it's a good talking point to talk about bottoms-up change, and I think many people listening right now are on that path. Hopefully this podcast helps with that. But I really worry about a lower income family on SNAP that is being pushed into soda and pushed into 70% of those SNAP food stamp dollars go to ultra processed food, and Medicaid only kicks in once that kid is diabetic.
Yeah. Why are you able to buy sugar sweetened beverages with SNAP?
Well, I worked for Coke and saw exactly why. You remember the Food Compass study that said, and we were all laughing about that said Lucky Charms are healthier than beef and
crazy and poached eggs and
poached eggs. Yeah, that poached eggs were less healthy than Honey Nut Cheerios. The chocolate almond milk was healthier than organic milk for dairy. The study was funded by the largest maker of almond milk. You went down the list.
How can these researchers sleep at night?
So here's the thing. That's a good question. We should get into that. Just real quick on your first question. Those studies aren't funny because what they do is they use those studies to impact public policy. Like how does the stated goal of the Food Compass studies was to impact school nutrition guidelines. So you laugh about these studies, but they are immediately taken. This is what I used to do, is you take those to members of Congress, you take those to school boards, and you say you don't need poached eggs, you don't need any fresh food, you can have cereal. How those people sleep at night, well, after I think you might have shared it, and I was sharing it, and Rogan retweeted one of our things, the things we were my co-founder Justin Mares wrote, and it was getting a lot of attention. I got a call from the lead author of the study, Dariush, the head of Tufts Nutrition School. You can't even make it up. He was at Davos. And he called me from like the side of like the halls of Davos, and he's screaming at me, questioning my credentials. You don't know what you're talking about. And I just kind of started asking him questions. I'm like, well, you basically said that Cheerios are, which is, not as sugar sweetened, but they were ranked higher than organic quinoa for grains.
It's crazy.
And I asked him, the grains in Cheerios, the grains in Lucky Charms, are those as healthy as quinoa? And he said, yes, they're fortified. They're as healthy as quinoa. And then I asked him, is it true that the majority of your funding for Tufts Nutrition School comes from food companies? He said, yes, that does not impact my judgment. That's just how it works. And then I asked him whether he receives personal consulting payments, which we know he did, many personal, so not research grants. He gets millions of dollars of research grants, but actually personal payments. He's literally able to be paid off. He's also, as many of them are now, paid directly by a Ozempic prescriber. So you got to unpack that one for me. And I asked him if that clouds his judgment. He said no. He's very self-righteous. He sleeps at night well. He might have even produced some studies that have helped people. I think absolutely he thinks he's being helpful. He does not think he's doing the evil bidding. But what it's done is it's allowed him to go on a Davos panel and talk about how, the system's so screwed right now, the best we can do is get kids. He talks about going from Honey Nut Cheerios to Cheerios, right? The fact that the system's so screwed and the fact that his judgment's a little plain, he's always just pushing for incrementalism. He's saying ultra-processed food's inescapable. He's saying that, that the USDA should be recommending some sugar to kids. He's okay with that. So what it does is it kind of clouds, I think maybe even not even with these folks realizing, clouds their judgment and contributes to incrementalism. The dean of Tufts Nutrition School should be following science and saying that we should be striving for a whole food, low sugar diet for American children.
Absolutely.
He should be emphatically stating the science, not trying to orchestrate what's possible. That's not for the scientists to do.
Exactly.
And this is the big problem. Now at the USDA, they consider stakeholders. So you've been able to kind of use these social justice issues to get into the science where they have to consider stakeholders. And because there's so many food deserts and so much food insecurity because of our rigged system, they now say because of that, the best we can do is a little bit better. It's not realistic. Instead of just saying with Tufts and the USDA and all these leaders of academia, they should just put a mantle and say it is a moral failing of the United States that we have a diabetes crisis among teens, that the USDA now says that a 2-year-old can have 10% of their diet added sugar.
Crazy.
It's just like, it would change tomorrow, and this is something we have executive orders on, and I think there's momentum. If the scientists just studied the science, there was less studies and just more plain speaking.
Yeah.
It's what you talk about. And we can debate different kind of, you talk about not majoring in the minors. It's like there's a lot to talk about kind of probably underneath, but getting to Whole Foods, getting to incentivizing movement, getting to these basic metabolic habits, talking about that with simplicity instead of hiding in the complexity, which I think is where evil hides, quite frankly.
Yeah. I mean, have you seen the series of posts or articles written by Anahad O'Connor for the Washington Post? Yeah. I mean, it revealed that the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, which is, obviously doesn't determine like the views of each and every dietitian necessarily, but it is still the most powerful, professional nutrition organization for nutrition professionals. Not only takes gifts from the ultra processed food industry, but has stake in those companies as well. And then we saw recently that that companies like GM, General Mills, and whatnot were incentivizing dietitians online to perpetuate this anti-diet message that all foods fit. There are no such thing as good and bad foods. I mean, it's just like, it's so crazy to me that more people are not aware of this corruption.
Well, we're talking about it, and I don't know. You've been in this fight longer. I'm a little bit optimistic. Maybe I'm being naive. I'm optimistic that your books, these books here, are selling well. The top podcasts are talking about this. People are buying biowearables. I feel like people are trying to opt out of the medical system, and there's a bottoms-up situation. I think we need to keep talking about it. and that bottoms-up change will lead to top-down change. Anahad is a hero, so I've been talking with him a lot.
He's amazing.
And we're trying to do a lot of top-down.
I wonder if that had anything to do. I don't. We haven't talked about this, but
Yeah.
I wonder if that had anything to do with him leaving the New York Times.
Yeah, the Washington Post, and I'm very cynical about the media, but he's at the Washington Post, to my knowledge, now still, and they've allowed him to be a warrior on this. On this, breaking down what you talked about, I think it should win the Pulitzer Prize. He actually did some sleuthing and found that these payments to the TikTok influencer dietitians, as you mentioned, they weren't reported. It's actually an FTC violation. I think there's actually going to be...
The FTC warned many of them, sent warning letters.
They're unreported advertising payments. Your mental health is better. You probably don't spend as much time on TikTok. But these guys are, I think, attacking you. They're attacking anybody that's talking about Whole Foods.
Yeah.
And they're attacking you. It's very interesting, right? And actually...
They attack the whole concept of food as medicine.
Yeah. So... I saw this very clearly working for the food companies. It's a little bit of a couple of steps, but let me try to unpack it. These companies are very aware of how to rig social justice issues and the hot buttons on the left and the right to get what they want. Once you call someone racist or sexist or what have you, it kind of shuts down debate. And they're very good at that. So let's just unpack what happens. Let's unpack what the food companies do. So they actually lobby, and I help with this, they lobby to keep food stamp funding low. They actually lobby to not increase food stamp funding. So lower income people don't have a lot of money to spend. And then, of course, they use those rigged nutrition studies to have basically all you can buy is ultra-processed food. And again, food stamps is a $90 billion transfer from the government treasury to ultra-processed food. So they create this dynamic where lower income people really can only afford that food and kind of addicted to this food. Then they pay the TikTok influencers to attack you and other folks that are talking about the importance of kids eating whole foods that aren't with a ton of toxins, glyphosate, what have you. They attack you for being classist. So they've rigged the system to where poor people can only afford, and all the ultra-processed food is subsidized, and the market is totally dysfunctional to basically make it a luxury to not eat poison. And then they pay people to call anyone questioning that classist. You can't even make it up. Then Coke has a massive deal. Anahad needs to cover this, but there is unbelievable connections between Coca-Cola, ultra-processed food companies, and the LA Unified School District. I'm hearing actually, I get interesting emails and stuff, but a lot of the budget for the school district comes from food companies. And that was a big strategy I saw working for the companies, that they really try to co-opt institutions that normalize their products for kids. There's a huge goal to get into schools and a huge goal to get into pediatric wards.
Start them young.
Yeah, and just kind of normalize it. We actually tried to have a natural birth, ended up needing to go to the hospital, and I walked right out after my son was born, and there's a Coke machine. That's very purposeful. We really tried to do that. So the LA Unified School District, who has partnerships with Coke, actually posted one of the stories from one of these bought-off influencers, unreported, and it said, the only bad donut is a moldy donut.
Wow.
And it is racist. They said racist because there's disproportionate obesity among marginalized populations to judge food. That is the largest school district in the country who's overseeing absolute devastation among metabolic health among kids, particularly lower income kids. I mean, this is crazy stuff. But again, what I'm trying to do, we talk about a little bit in the book, and what I'm trying to contribute to this is just the specifics. This is known. They know how to rig the debate. Anahad I've been working with, and he recently reported something I'm really trying to do. What I'm focused most of my time on is a company called TrueMed. Aside from TrueMed, this is a message I have to everyone, which is, and it ties to the book, which is that there's another path available to you when you have a chronic condition. The doctor reaches quickly for the statin or the drugs. The doctor can write a letter of medical necessity. So a doctor actually does have the ability to write a letter outlining dietary supplement, food, sauna, metabolic health interventions. There's no law that says medicine is just a drug. A doctor can actually write a prescription for exercise. And with that note, for instance, if you're pre-diabetic, have a doctor's note for exercise, you can buy your gym membership tax-free.
Wow.
Tax-free with HSA, FSA dollars. That's a 40% savings. Our company has driven $100 million in the past 5 months from HSA accounts waiting for people to get sick and buy drugs to gyms, to supplements, to healthy metabolic items. As Anahad reported, an IRS official gave a speech recently, and they said, food isn't medicine, exercise isn't medicine. These are growing too fast, these deductions. And he said literally that if you're obese, we'll cover Ozempic, but we think people are doing too much exercise. For the first time in the history of the IRS, an official actually commented on how much doctors should be prescribing certain things. It had no weight and immediately got denounced by members of Congress, and they reversed in a conference. They reversed and clarified their position. But that's the type of environment that this creates, this influencer environment and the research environment. I honestly think that official didn't even understand that we have a metabolic health crisis and didn't even understand how little it's working, that so many people are getting prescriptions for drugs, and how vital it is that in that meeting between a patient and a doctor, they can get a letter of medical necessity for exercise, supplements, what have you. And you just go down the list, and we talk about it in the book, and you talk about this. But eating a bunch of salmon, getting your omega-3s, that's really, you talk about this in your Genius books, that's really powerful for the brain.
Yeah.
That has some really interesting studies to depression. That there can be there could be prescriptions for salmon. So that's the point of the book. That's an example of a policy change that we actually have available to us now. The company TrueMed does that very quickly online. Doctor's notes that unlock HSA, FSA spending, but that's even being attacked. Any shift to people understanding the root cause, and not just lowering their one biomarker, but potentially working on the foundation of their overall metabolic health. There's real opposition to that.
Yeah, it's funny. The loudest antagonists to the food as medicine movement on social media that you'll find are the same exact people that are actively promoting the consumption of ultra processed foods.
That's
the grand irony of it all. It's crazy.
It's very sad. They are being paid by the food companies, and you got to wonder what I think a lot of people get into motivations,
or they're just idiots.
I think it's stupidity. I think most people look in the mirror and think they're doing good things. I think they've truly been co-opted on the availability and class argument that lower income people can only buy these items and it's classist. I think they've somehow bought into that. I think there's an addiction crisis in this country where so many people are addicted to ultra processed food. There's a lot of desire for denialism about how bad it is. I think it's almost like our entire country has kind of gotten hooked on very bad things.
They're absolutely addictive.
And there's Rob Lustig and others have talked about this really eloquently, but you look at the DSM identifications of addiction. It's like knowing that there's some harm but keep doing it, denialism. So I think that's part of it, that these people's audiences are addicted and they really want to see an explanation. I think we're having trouble realizing how bad it is. I mean, our food system is I think really compromised. I think it's really leading to crazy things. And I think you talk about this, but I think I saw food an effort to weaponize it. I know there's this debate around, whether it's the ingredients or the seed oils or what have you, or whether it's just really about overconsumption of calories. My point is that, and I saw this working for food companies, is that the fact that ultra-processed food, they're allowed to put so many thousands of different ingredients and mixtures and different, science experiments on the exact way to mix the different ingredients. The food is literally weaponized to be more palatable. So that is directly related to why we're eating more calories. A lot of these nutrition influencers go, it's not ultra-processed food, it's the calories. No, the ultra-processed food leads to the calorie consumption.
Right, of course.
I think that's a point people miss a lot. It's like, they slam anyone for talking about, they might slam this interview for talking about the dangers of ultra-processed food. And that's not research-backed. No, the ultra-processed food is designed to make you eat more. I also think a lot of the evidence-based folks do miss that. I think I just have to believe that more is going to come out about these chemicals in foods.
100%.
It's just and I think that's part of the problem with the medical system. It sometimes has us take a leave of our common sense.
Yeah.
There are thousands and thousands of chemicals in food that are not allowed in Europe. Just take glyphosate on down. I am slammed on social media for talking about glyphosate. I'm slammed with studies saying how healthy glyphosate is. You just have to use common sense there. Those studies are almost certainly rigged, and there's got to be microbiome issues and other issues that we don't have research for, but clearly there's additional effects these chemicals are having on functions of our body that we don't understand. I mean, we talk at the end of the book, it's like in 100 years, we're not going to look back on today thinking we knew anything about the miraculous interconnectivity of the body.
Yeah.
I think part of one of the siloings of health, one of the problems is like we don't even have curiosity. Nobody even thinks that GI dysfunction, how that might be related to depression because the serotonin in our guts, how when you take Ozempic and you're nauseous and vomiting all the time, that's just like one little side effect. What does that mean for what's going on over our body? Is that related to other potential side effects or comorbidities? It's like there's dramatic interconnection in our body that we're kind of beaten to not ask questions about or not even be curious about. And then we're attacking the sacred cow of this idea of the siloing and the 42 departments. Another sacred cow of medicine that I think is really worthy of examination is the double-blind, placebo-controlled trial. I mean, there are many cases where that research could be very valuable, but that process, which was created by bad incentives, if you trace the history down all the way to Rockefeller, as kind of the gold standard of a research study, you can't do a double-blind placebo-controlled study on food. You can't placebo food. You can't placebo exercise, strenuous zone 2 or a HIIT or whatever. You can't. So the study itself, which is the gold standard, is designed to only be tested with a drug. It's just like a sugar pill.
Right.
That's all you can do, and that's the only thing that allows you to get to the highest level of medical acceptance. You actually can't do gold standard research on any of these metabolic habits.
Yeah, unpack that because I feel like that's something that needs to be restated so that people really understand it. The baseline exposure for any drug is 0, right? For any synthetic drug is 0. So it's really easy to design a randomized controlled trial where you take 2 groups of people, you give one a placebo, a sugar pill, and you give the other group this drug where their baseline exposure is 0 and see what the effects are. For a food ingredient like seed oils, for example, and this is where I think a lot of the confusion about the relative paucity of a negative signal in the human randomized controlled trials really needs to be discussed, is that the baseline exposure of seed oils for your average person today consuming the standard American diet is already the highest it's ever been in human history. It's already exceedingly high, So it's like, how do you can't really control for that. You have, if you try to design a randomized controlled trial, both groups are already, consuming more than their ancestors have by orders of magnitude.
It's a very good point. And it's choosing the variables. It's like, I was reading some study recently or some paper, and it's like, there's never been a study that controlled for light exposure. It's like we have all of these studies making all these different claims, but like light exposure has been almost not studied at all. And like that's a variable that comes in this study that could be a big impact. But if you actually talk about light exposure and talk about how artificial lights and our circadian rhythm being totally out of control might have different health impacts, you're attacked for there not being a ton of research on that. So the people are able to choose the exact variables, and they're able to design the study to make the outcome a drug. Yeah, I think there's a lot of well-meaning people in this evidence-based community that are talking about the human randomized control trials on, and trying to get to the truth. I think they have good intentions.
Yeah.
But I think we miss the forest of the trees a lot of the time. I mean, fundamentally, we have a terrible industry that is funding the majority of the research, that is funding our information sources, that's funding the medical schools, that's funding the nutrition schools. And the food industry, they're not trying to poison as an outcome of the American people, but they really want food addictive and cheap. They don't have our interests at heart. I mean, again, all you need to do is look at Kellogg's. They literally reformulate the ingredients for Americans versus other countries.
Crazy.
These are people that have really lost their way. And I just think it would be a better situation if we have broad principles instead of get lost in the minutia. Like I truly believe if we fired all bureaucrats in nutrition. I'm not even being facetious. Like if we literally let go of every single nutrition bureaucrat in the government and had a national goal to lower ultra-processed food consumption from close to 70% today to where it is more in Japan, like 25%, 20%, which it is in some countries, we transform health. If we stopped with, and I've gotten a lot out of your exercise tips, and I think it is important once you get to the first level, get deeper, but we got to get the first level. We got to get people moving.
Yeah.
like I think once you get moving and once you commit to that habit, you can optimize the workout routine, optimize the right strength training, optimize the right cardio. I know you have a lot of thoughts on that, but there's not an epidemic of people moving every day.
No.
And then, because it immediately sets your path of curiosity off. You might not, not be seeing the results you want on hitting the treadmill all the time, get more into weight training, but you've got to start. If the principle on all, a health principle for our country was just get people moving 200 minutes, like a dramatic war on sedentary behavior, just that as an outcome. But it gets lost in all the studies. It gets lost in all this complexity. I don't think the metabolic health crisis at the macro level is that complicated. If we cut ultra-processed food consumption, if we as a public policy, redesign schools, which are criminal, also designed by John D. Rockefeller to literally have kids sitting down to be workers, not thinkers, as he said, in sunless rooms, actually designing the kids not to be moving too much. I mean, you look at the research, these things are designed by bad interests.
Well, I think one of the problems, and this is why I think so many people are confused when it comes to knowing how to actually feed themselves, that if you were to take 100 nutrition experts and ask them for their perspective on how to eat healthily, you'll get 100 different answers. Some are more inclined to probably respond low carb. Some are more inclined to respond plant-based. Others now are more, take a more carnivore-centric approach. So how do you think we best feed ourselves today, given all of the competing voices?
Well, and to be honest, Max, I've learned a lot from you on this, but we have a principle in the book, which is that we need to break down food into its components for what our body needs. I think for some reason with food, we're not able to see it with its components. Like if these two glasses, one of them had arsenic in it, we know that was bad, but we can't differentiate between a grass-fed piece of meat, a grain-fed piece of meat, and a Beyond Burger. We don't actually, we're not good at thinking of what happened to those animals' cells between one eating what they're, kind of evolutionary made to eat, out in the sun, not as stressed. How does that impact the actual inner workings of what that animal is for what's feeding your body? With conventionally grown vegetables versus more organic, regenerative, it's what is that soil? What's the nutrient content of it's dramatic difference based on the soil quality. With the Beyond Burger, it's labeled as healthy, as we all know, but is glyphosate laden pea protein with canola oil and artificial flavorings. Is that a good thing? So I think we're getting there. I think obviously your listeners are getting there. But just being able to really unpack what's in those items, and then that leads you on a path of curiosity. My sister used to be really on the plant-based train, but she realized she was kind of duped by that. I mean, to be honest.
Wow.
I think we're definitely duped by that. I mean, I think there's some really faulty environmental arguments because I think the best environmental thing we can do is have regenerative farming, quite frankly, and have ecosystems that are natural, that are literally how animals and plants have grown forever until the advent of industrial farming. It's actually much better for the environment. It's much better for health. I think these dietary philosophies really blind us and have us take leave of just common sense of how humans are evolutionary made to eat, which is plants, animals, matching our nutrient needs to what we're eating, to being much more attuned to what we're eating and the soil, and that's been taken away from us. So we in the book have to get totally away from dietary philosophies and just what do we need to power ourselves correctly? It's omega-3s, it's protein, it's fiber, it's antioxidants. What do we need to stay away from? I mean, I think just as a general principle, what I don't like about seed oils is these are literally foreign substances. These are processed foreign substances, one of the top sources of American calories. They were created in 1910 as an industrial byproduct. It's like, just at that basic point for me, a highly processed, not natural ingredient we're putting into our body, it probably isn't great.
Yeah.
And we wonder why we have an inflammation crisis. I think by definition, inflammation is our body's response to foreign invaders. We have a lot of foreign substances we're putting in our body. So those, I think our grains are clearly a huge problem in the United States. I think obviously you have just a ton of chemicals in those, but the highly processed grains where they take off the fiber, the shelf stable, started with good intentions post World War II. We wanted to feed the world, but I think it's been totally co-opted. I think they're frankenfood, and I think highly processed grains is like, that's just my personal opinion. I'm not even speaking for Casey. I think that's a core root, our grains, of like a problem in the United States. You hear all those anecdotes about people going to Europe and eating pasta, getting, losing weight. But I think the grains, the processed grains are a real problem. And then obviously the added sugar, which has gone up 100 times in 100 years among kids. If you stay away from some simple ingredients, I really do think if you scan the labels for those 3 ingredients, you're almost pushed to a whole food diet, or at the very least ultra processed food. That's probably the companies care about you a little bit more.
Yeah.
You got to hunt for the things you need, not for the and avoid the things you don't. I mean, it's that simple, and you can really fit that into a lot of different dietary philosophies. And again, I can't stress this enough. Then you get to zone 2. This has been my journey. You start with simple principles, and then you get to deeper. You start exploring things, you say, about different ways to optimize. You compare that to what other people say. That's a great path to be on. But the problem is we complicate the high end. I think there's real incentives in the medical field. I mean, they just thrive on the complexity.
Yeah.
They thrive on the debate. There's conferences, there's nutrition conferences all over the world at all times where people are just debating these little nuances. And I think that's where we really lost our way. And again, I'll say this. I'm doing a lot of work in public policy, going to a lot of public policy conferences. It's all about minutia.
Yeah.
It's all about literally hundreds of people looking at page 300 of Medicare Part D, like the law. It's like everyone's losing sight of the high level by design, because that gives everyone meaning and gives everyone the ability to, if those conferences were literally just like, how do we have simple principles that we gear to, we'd be in a much better place.
Well, you're so right. It gives everybody meaning. It supports credentialism. It's like you shouldn't need to book an appointment with a nutrition PhD or even
right.
And I love dietitians. I think I think anybody who's dedicated their life to healing others, I think that's commendable, right? They're on the right side of the moral coin. But as a human being, you shouldn't need to consult with a professional to know how to feed yourself. I mean, these are the kinds of things that we should be taught by our parents, ideally, right? But in elementary school, should be a part of the curriculum.
I mean, this is what Casey and I are most passionate about, what we talk about at the end of the book. I think we have a spiritual crisis on our hands where we've been so battered to not take autonomy for our own health, basically, right? It's like, I always go to the animals in the wild. Like, you do not have an obesity or diabetes crisis among giraffes.
Yeah.
Like, we are born with an innate sense of what's good for us. We have, satiety triggers with, if we're eating the food that we're biologically made to eat. Ultra processed food, our environment right now is weaponized to hijack our biology.
Yeah.
And I saw it. And
the seminal study that showed that ultra processed foods, by the time you've consumed them to satiety, you've already overconsumed them. Ironically, that was one of the few studies, I guess in the minority of nutrition studies, that was actually funded by the NIH. Great. That study wasn't funded by the food industry.
Good, and that's awesome. And,
probably wouldn't have been published if it was.
Yeah, and that's amazing. I mean, the NIH has got a lot of problems, but yeah, the study just funded by the NIH would be the best one. Unfortunately, they do some studies independently, but 80% of their funding is grants and there's no conflict of interest grants. And the majority of those grants go to people with a direct conflict of interest. But that is great. And but I think that we are all getting sicker. We're being told that these impulses that we're born with to manage our satiety and and really manage our metabolic health, we get told we're anti-science or going against medical advice if we ask questions. We are berated, the American patient, for asking questions. We're kind of beaten down. I think we're beating the awe and curiosity about the interconnectedness of our bodies to our environment. I mean, really, there's an assault on asking questions and patients being empowered. And I think it's the root of a lot of problems that we're facing in the country. I mean, we're all kind of listening to the experts, getting sick, and then taking our drugs and being berated if we question that process. I think we got to wake up on that. And I think there's an empowerment kind of crisis right now in the country. And I think health is the most important thing. It's what, regulates our bodies and our perception of reality and our brains. I mean, things clearly not going well, and there's real effort, with the media, to really bash anyone asking a question. I mean, look at how you've been attacked sometimes, and anyone kind of calling out these incentives.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah.
Where does the title of the book come from? Good Energy.
Yeah. Well, a little inside baseball on writing a book. My initial proposed title was A Sick System.
A Sick System.
And we had a great agent. I mean, you might have seen this through your books are framed really positively. And it was a bit more of a diatribe. And as you might imagine, I like to go on. And Casey, was very indignant about her time in medicine. And we had an amazing agent. And he really helped us kind of convince us that this is a positive story. Like, and I don't mean that as like just to frame it that way. This story is positive. Like, I would not trade living today versus any other time. We've got a great advancements in modern society. As we were talking about earlier, before we went on camera, it's an exciting time, an entertaining time. I mean, I don't think we understand the pace of change and progress in many ways that we're experiencing right now versus the expanse of human history. I think we have lost our way on health. It's a huge issue. I think our system's designed, quite frankly, thankfully, to have conversations like this and pick it apart. I think, as we talk about in the book, what's really happened is we haven't plugged the holes of what modern advancements have brought. Modern advancements have been great. I like artificial light, but that actually has costs. Our constant temperature regulation, I wouldn't want to be living outside in the cold and hot and temperature changes like most people throughout human history have been. But like, there's some costs in the temperature regulation and the movement. We used to walk a lot, and I like having a car. But it's like, we have these taxes we need to pay. And health needs to be about kind of plugging the holes of what modern society's taken away. But the fact that we're talking about this, and I think the fact that I believe, frankly, that Americans want to be healthy, I think we can get there. This is an existential issue, but there's a bottoms-up revolution happening, and I'm speaking with a lot of members of Congress. You got RFK, you'd have President Trump talking about these issues. Like there's a lot of people waking up. So the book, we wanted to have a positive title, and energy obviously relates to metabolism, and it's about how obviously there's another layer of complexity. But metabolism is interrelated. Practicing metabolic healthy habits will solve a lot of problems and needs to be the basis of healthcare, especially for chronic diseases. So we wanted a positive title that related to metabolism, and not a big diatribe that I wanted to write. So that's how we got there.
I like it. Yeah. I like it. So where somebody listening to this who's maybe naive to these concepts, doesn't know where to start, where would you suggest beginning taking that first step?
Yeah. I think you've got, so the first step is the paradigm of trusting your doctor on acute conditions, trusting yourself on chronic. The first step is just empowerment of understanding that differentiation between acute and chronic. It is okay to take a step back when your doctor's pulling out a prescription pad if it's a chronic. That's not going to kill you right away. That's number one. You can be an empowered patient. You probably know more than your doctor if you start reading some of these books. Have empowerment on chronic conditions.
What are some examples of these kinds of chronic conditions that you're talking about?
Yeah, anything that's not killing you right away. Like, you're not going to die if you don't take that statin right away. You're not going to die if you don't take the SSRI right away. I mean, obviously depression is very serious, but like the metformin, the Ozempic. You're going to be pushed those by your doctor. You're going to be told you're going against science by your doctor. But it's 9 out of the 10 leading causes of respiratory illness, kidney disease, fatty liver disease. So anything that's not deadly right away, that's chronic, that you still live with for a while. So that is the majority of what's plaguing the American population. The majority of doctors' visits: fatigue, insomnia, ADHD, things like that. Like really most things except life-threatening issues. The framework there is you take a step back on that and trust yourself a little bit and don't get beaten down to not ask questions. Then we get into the plan, and I really think every American in the country should have in-depth blood testing. I think we have a one-size-fits-all medical system. I think it's very powerful to actually understand what's going on inside your body, and we have a detailed roadmap. Just the couple blood tests you get on your usual appointment. I had, as I was starting this journey, slightly high cholesterol, but the doctor said it was fine. And Casey said, no, this is a huge indicator of metabolic dysfunction. This blood test is telling you have serious issues. It's probably going to give you another chronic disease or kill you earlier than you would want to live. And when we went back to the doctor, I'm like, is this an indicator of metabolic dysfunction? They're like, yeah, but it's right in the borderline. You're not treatable yet. We can't prescribe something to you yet. So really understanding and being empowered and finding a doctor, ideally a functional medicine practitioner, but there's new online services that do this that can really unpack your blood test and have you know, or do you have a low-grade autoimmune condition already? I think that knowledge is power. I think we need to have more and more of these biowearables. I like my levels, my Whoop, just to know how you are. It was actually helpful to know my blood sugar was spiking a little bit. That made me really motivated. So the second is knowledge, and we've got a guide for blood testing here. And then I think it's really just analyzing for yourself the standard of care. It's not an anti-drug message 100% as we talked about, but researching a different route when you have a chronic condition. This is what my company does with the HSA letters, but I truly believe that people should be prescribed, we support 8 Sleep. It helped me a lot. It helped me sleep.
I love my 8 Sleep.
That is a health product.
Yeah.
Improving your sleep a little bit is absolutely something you should invest in my opinion, before a marginal, if you're on the borderline for a chronic disease treatment. My wife is dealing with some inflammation, some muscle issues. She did a whole research on red light therapy. There's a lot of research on that. That's been great for her instead of taking a bunch of drugs or, Advil. For pain, instead of taking the opioids. You go to depression. You have studies time and time again. They've done numerous of these studies where you actually have therapy and drugs and therapy. And then another cohort, exercise and cutting ultra-processed food. The cohort that doesn't do therapy, doesn't take the top drug in the country, SSRIs, that just exercises out in the sun and eats healthy, they do better on depression. So just knowing that you're being misled by your doctor not following the standard of care that should be prescribed, following the science, and going outside the system and just asking those common sense questions, getting other opinions. Yeah, I'll just say it, listening to folks like you and going on a path of curiosity. If you have a chronic condition that's not going to kill you right away, it gets to the basics. I mean, this is, again, there's a lot to optimize. But the book is about our circadian rhythm, which is, I think, eating and obviously meal timings, sleep, light exposure. I think really understanding that, understanding obviously your food. There's 2 chapters on protocols for that. Temperature regulation, I think, is more marginal, but something that's important that's coming up more and more. And then chronic stress, I think, is a huge one.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a huge one, and our mind is very connected to our metabolism and our health. I think, obviously we have weapons of mass destruction in most of our kids' pockets with their cell phones, chronic stress. I think just as food is kind of hijacked, I think there's trillions of dollars of incentives that prey on our dopamine. I was just talking to our friend Sean Stevenson, and he was keeping track of the ads on the NBA game. And 90% of them were basically attacks on our dopamine. It's gambling, it's beer, it's Doritos, It's just down the list. It's like there's so much profit in us being in fear, us being addicted, us. And again, I'm a capitalist. I don't really think much should be banned, but I think that there should be awareness. There should be a requirement for patients being informed. And then when we're talking about the healthcare system, the $4.5 trillion we spend, that should be going to ameliorating the problem, not profiting from really keeping it going by managing the condition. So I do think that money, if we're going to have it, should be asking, okay, we've got these dynamics in capitalism, these dynamics in modern society. Where should this money go? And again, I can't stress this enough. 95% of funding goes to preventable 95% of medical conditions are on preventable metabolic conditions. We need a complete reframe in where that money goes.
Yeah. Wow. Man, well, thank you for being such a powerful foot soldier, boots on the ground in this fight. I mean, I think what you're doing is super important, and again, the book is amazing. People should not walk but run to pick it up. And again, I had the honor of getting to endorse it on the back. So, thank you for letting me do that. Yeah, man. So, what's next for you? You just like continuing to beat this drum?
Well, first off, thank you for inspiring us a lot, writing that endorsement, and it's an honor to be in the fight with you. I am so just energized to be on this mission with my sister, and meeting and helping to push this forward with so many warriors. We've got the book we're pushing. Most of my time is on TrueMed, so you can go to TrueMed.com, and then something special is happening. I mean, I think I mentioned we've done 150,000 patients, $100 million of tax-free money in the past 5 months. I mean, there's a revolution happening where people are realizing that they can spend their tax-free dollars on their 8 Sleep or their Peloton or Momentous. These are all companies we're working with, and we're proud to be. We think these are medical companies.
At a high level, what does TrueMed do? So it's like it allows you to use your dollars that are earmarked. They're tax free essentially and earmarked for healthcare.
Yeah, you can go to TrueMed.com and see all these companies we work with. If you are on 8 Sleep right now, you see pay with credit card, pay with Affirm, pay with TrueMed. You just select TrueMed. It's just like PayPal or Affirm. And we, like Affirm asks a couple credit questions, we ask a couple healthcare questions. We hired the lawyers from the telehealth companies that prescribe Adderall, and we're like, we want to prescribe 8 Sleep. And we have a quick telehealth survey that determines whether you're eligible. And it's got to be for the prevention or reversal of a specific condition. And if you are able in the payment flow to pay with your HSA FSA card.
Do you need like a prescription or something?
No, you get approved right in the flow in 2 minutes.
Wow.
We're able to evaluate whether improve sleep, or whether a Peloton, or we're very deep right now with CrossFit and 24-hour fitness and Hydro, many leading fitness companies. But we assess in the payment flow, so it's however long it takes you to fill out the survey. But that's exactly how some of these other it assesses your information, and you're able to pay. So it's a seamless process to get qualified, and if qualified, use your HSA, FSA dollars for metabolically healthy items. And we are on a warpath here. And by working with Thrive Market, Momentous, Athletic Greens, these other leading companies, we are actually forming a nonprofit advocacy group with the CEOs of 20 other companies, Pendulum and many others. And we're going to execute the tactics that I saw Pharma and Food execute. And just quickly on the high level, because there's a bottoms-up empowerment happening, but we've got to solve the top-down too, because we've got trillions of dollars of incentives against us. The food and pharma industry is able to focus on specific issues, specific bills, just chip away at getting more funding to SNAP and all these pots of money. We're going to focus on specifics. We're drafting executive orders on specific issues like the media spending that potentially the next president will sign. We're working with, my sister and I are meeting with 50 members of Congress next week, and we're not boiling the ocean. We're getting them fired up on the mission that we're talking about right now, but we're finding specific areas where more money can go to supplements or exercise. There's some military funding, $200 billion pot of money that more could go to exercise. There's just all these little pockets that we can chip away at, and we're also availing ourselves of the legal field. I mean, these companies have rigged all of our institutions. So I've partnered with Jason Karp. I don't know if you know the founder of Who Chocolates.
Good friend, yeah.
Oh, great. So really working closely with him. He's been leading the charge, and Vani at Food Babe. We've formed a small coalition. He launched that activist letter against Kellogg's.
I saw that.
Yeah,
Yes.
and there's a lot of discussion happening with Kellogg's to get the food dyes out of their cereal. But I think you chimed in. A lot of health leaders, Bill Ackman. So there's we're trying to channel the activists, the billionaires. All these folks want to channel their energy, and that's my passion. It's happening through TrueMed, but just also this coalition, which we'll announce soon. Just everyone wants to focus this really frustration high level into tactical things, and that's my passion. Having seen inside the system, we can start chipping away. And a reporter asked me yesterday, we're going to have some news on the Kellogg's thing soon. Why aren't you talking about the whole food industry? Why aren't you talking about this issue with food colorings high level? That's what they want us to do. We're going to chip away at Kellogg's, and the fact that the CEO is saying that kids should be eating Fruit Loops for dinner that have toxic ingredients that they don't put in other countries' food. We're gonna hammer them until they change, and then we're gonna go to the next one. And then the next one. We're gonna focus on specifics, and that's my key. And I just want folks to know there's a lot of people coming together. Money, reach, brain power to start focusing on specifics. And, I do feel in this political climate, this is a bipartisan issue. I mean,
yeah, of course.
This poisoning of kids and then drugging them, nobody really likes this. I am optimistic that we're going to have some good change.
Well, things are starting to change. You saw Sweetgreen recently announce that they're no longer cooking their proteins in industrially refined seed oils, True Food Kitchen recently announced the same thing, which is amazing, which I know is a Jason Karp project as well. And that's real change. That's super impressive. You can now buy organic food at Walmart. You can buy, grass-fed beef at Costco. It's amazing.
I want to give a shout out to Sweetgreen. I've been working with Jonathan and Nicholas and talking to them a lot. And I think everyone in the country should be looking at what Sweetgreen is doing. This is a very large public company. And I can tell you from seeing briefly inside there, they are working tirelessly on supply chain to, really at scale. They just introduced grass-fed beef.
Yeah, super nutrient
rating the
dense.
seed oils. It's a real case study for me. It should be taught at Harvard Business School of so many companies when they get criticized. I think you might have criticized them or other folks on some of their ingredients. A lot of friends were kind of questioning. They didn't act defensive like so many companies do. They actually embraced it.
They listened.
Was talking to Paul Saladino, who was criticizing them not, and then helped connect them, and they talked with Paul, and now Paul's now. It's that is the way to do it. And I just admire them so much, and they're really making bold steps. A convenient, fast way to get really incredibly sourced food. So I think it's a great example. Consumers are really going in that direction. I will say though, and this is what my passion is, it is bullshit that their salads have to be expensive. That is not the result of the free market. That is a rigged market. It is totally rigged incentives that, fast food, crappy fast food is $1 and their ingredients. There's more subsidies to tobacco than fruits and vegetables. Only 0.4% of all agriculture subsidies go to fruits and vegetables, and very little go to grass-fed meat. It's all industrial. So to me, it's actually not the free market that it's actually they're succeeding despite completely rigged incentives against them. And my passion in life with TrueMed and this advocacy work is get to a free market. I don't want any bans. I don't want any even taxes, but the way things are subsidized right now and the way things are incentivized, it's not even. It's actually totally slanted to poisoning Americans. So I think that cavalry's coming, and it's to help companies like Sweetgreen.
Yeah. Man, well, thank you so much for doing what you do.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's such important work, and yeah, man, it's an honor to be in the fight together with you.
Thank you, man.
So thanks for coming out. Where can people pick up Good Energy, and where can they find you on social media?
Socials are my name, Calley Means on Twitter and Instagram. Follow me on Twitter. We're going to talk about a lot about this advocacy work, and I'd really love people to share their stories of how metabolically healthy habits have changed their lives. And then Good Energy's available everywhere. Just grateful for the support and be on this mission.
#1 on Amazon as of this recording. No big deal. That's amazing.
Well, I have some disappointing news. Another doctor has overtaken Dr. Calley Means. Dr. Seuss has just overtaken us for #1. So I knew we'd get attacked from doctors, but I didn't realize it would be Dr. Seuss. But let's get it back above Dr. Seuss.
Well, if any doctor is going to do it.
Yeah, he's a pretty good doctor.
Yeah,
I will admit.
He is a pretty good doctor.
Yeah.
Awesome, man. Well, thanks again for coming out. Hey, if you liked that video, you need to check out this one here, and I'll see you there.